Nobody expected it to happen the way it happened. Pam Bondi had been speaking for less than 90 seconds when J.D. Vance interrupted her. Not gently, not with the procedural courtesy that courtroom exchanges are supposed to maintain. He cut directly into the middle of her sentence at the exact moment she was building toward the point she had spent the first part of her argument establishing. And what he said in that interruption dismantled everything she had been constructing before she could finish constructing it. The proceeding had been tense before either of them spoke. The nature of what was being argued that day had drawn attention from people who understood that whatever was decided inside that room would have consequences that extended well beyond the specific matter before the court. Both sides had come prepared. Both sides had documentation. Both sides believed they were holding the stronger position. What neither side had fully accounted for was the possibility that the exchange between Vance and Bondi would stop being a legal argument and become something else entirely. Bondi opened with precision. She had clearly rehearsed the sequencing of her argument down to the specific order in which she introduced each element. She was building a foundation, laying down facts that she intended to connect to a larger conclusion that she believed the record supported unambiguously. Her tone was controlled, authoritative, the tone of someone who has been in courtrooms long enough to know that the first impression a judge forms in the opening minutes of an argument is the one that does the most work for the rest of the proceeding. She was 3 sentences into the second paragraph of that argument when Vance spoke. He did not raise his hand. He did not wait for a pause. He spoke into the middle of her sentence at the precise moment she used a phrase that he had apparently been waiting for. Because the phrase she used described a timeline, a specific sequence of events that she was presenting as established and uncontested. And Vance had a document in front of him that showed the timeline she was describing did not match the record. He said so, directly, without softening it, without the procedural language that typically cushions a challenge in a formal proceeding. He named the discrepancy out loud while she was still speaking and did not stop until he had finished saying what he needed to say. Bondi stopped mid-sentence. The room registered what had just happened before anyone spoke again. Because being interrupted in a courtroom is not simply a procedural disruption, it is a signal. It tells everyone present that the person doing the interrupting believes they have something more important than what is currently being said. And it tells the person being interrupted that their argument has just been publicly challenged at the moment they were most invested in it. Bondi looked at Vance. Then she looked at the document he was holding. She recognized what it was. That recognition was visible to the people watching closely enough, because her response was not the immediate rebuttal of someone who had anticipated this challenge and prepared for it. It was the slightly delayed response of someone recalibrating in real time. She attempted to continue her argument. She picked up approximately where she had been before the interruption and tried to re-establish the momentum she had been building. It did not work, because Vance had not finished. The first interruption had named the discrepancy. The second thing he said named the source of it. He referenced a specific filing, a document that had been entered into the record weeks earlier that contained language directly contradicting the timeline Bondi was presenting as established fact. He read the relevant section aloud. Not all of it, just the part that mattered. The part that put the date on record in a way that could not be reinterpreted without acknowledging that the reinterpretation was happening. Bondi's recovery attempt collapsed in the middle of her next sentence. Not dramatically, not visibly in the way that makes for clean television. It collapsed in the way that legal arguments collapse when the foundation they were built on has just been removed while the structure was still standing. The words kept coming, but the architecture underneath them was gone, and everyone in that room who understood what they were watching could see it. She shifted her argument, moved to a different element of her position, an element that did not depend on the timeline Vance had just put in dispute. It was a reasonable tactical adjustment. Under normal circumstances, it might have worked. Under normal circumstances, the shift would have been smooth enough that the original problem got absorbed into the broader flow of the proceeding. These were not normal circumstances. Because Vance had anticipated the shift, the document he had used to challenge the timeline was not the only document in front of him. He had a second one, and the second one addressed exactly the element Bondi had just moved to. He waited until she had fully committed to her new direction, until she had said enough to establish that this was where her argument was going, and then he interrupted her again. This interruption was quieter than the first one, more precise. He did not need volume. He needed the single sentence that connected what she was saying now to what the second document showed about why she was saying it. That sentence landed in the middle of her argument like something structural giving way. Bondi stopped speaking. The silence lasted 3 seconds. In a courtroom, 3 seconds of silence is a very long time. The judge looked up from the papers on the bench. The people in the gallery who had been following the exchange with the focused attention of those who understood its significance went completely still. Bondi looked at the document Vance was referencing. She looked at the section he had indicated. She looked at him. And then she said something that everyone in that room will remember for a very specific reason. She did not dispute the document. She did not challenge its authenticity or its relevance or the section he had read from it. What she said was that the document needed to be understood in a broader context. It was the same move that experienced lawyers make when the specific is working against them. Retreat to the general. Widen the frame. Make the problem look smaller by making everything around it look larger. Vance did not let her widen the frame. He brought it back. He named the specific section. He named the specific date. He named the specific individual whose signature appeared on the document. And he asked whether the context she was describing was documented anywhere in the record currently before the court. It was not a rhetorical question. It was a genuine procedural challenge, because if the context she was referencing existed, it should have been in the record, and if it was in the record, she should have been able to point to it. She could not point to it. What she offered instead was a description of events and circumstances that she stated were relevant but could not immediately cite from the existing record, which meant that her argument at that moment was resting on something that was not in front of the court and could not be verified by anyone in that room against what had already been formally submitted. Vance let her finish the description. He wrote something down while she was speaking. He looked at the judge. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. The judge looked at Bondi. The question the judge asked was quiet and procedural in its language, but its meaning was not procedural at all. It asked Bondi to identify where in the current record the context she was describing could be found. The answer she gave was not an answer. It was a promise that the supporting documentation existed and could be produced. A promise that meant that the argument she had been making for the last several minutes had been built on a foundation that was not currently present in the proceeding where she was making it. The gavel came down shortly after that. Not dramatically, just the ordinary procedural sound of a session being paused. But in the context of everything that had happened in the preceding minutes, it carried the weight of a conclusion. Bondi's team began gathering documents immediately. The speed of that gathering told its own story. Vance sat back. He did not look satisfied in any visible way. He looked like someone who had done the thing he came to do and was now waiting for the process to catch up with what had just happened. The room did not erupt. Courtrooms almost never do. What happened instead was the particular quality of silence that follows a moment when everyone present understands that something significant has just shifted and nobody is entirely certain yet what it means for everything that comes next. Bondi's position going into that proceeding had been considered strong by the people who had been following the case. The documentation she had compiled was substantial. The argument she had prepared was built on months of work by a team that understood the record thoroughly. None of that changed because of what happened in that room. But the record from that exchange is now part of the proceeding. The interruptions are in the transcript. The documents Vance used are in the record. The moment Bondi could not point to the supporting material for the context she was describing is documented in a way that will be reviewed by everyone who touches this case going forward. Vance had not needed to win the argument in the room. He had needed to put something in the record that could not be taken out of it. That is what he did. The courtroom went quiet at the moment that mattered, and in legal proceedings, quiet moments have a way of being considerably louder in